Stop watching Fox or CNN or whatever you watch all day. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of TRD Talks Live. I'm Erik Engquist, Senior Managing Editor at The Real Deal, and your host for today. I am happy to be joined by the Executive Director of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, Rick Cotton. Thank you very much for joining us, Rick.
Good to be with you, Erik.
We have a lot to talk about because the Port Authority has such a huge portfolio. But before we do that, I have a personal question for you. You were one of the first famous people to be diagnosed with COVID way back in early March. And I would just, maybe you could just take us through very briefly what that was like, how you recovered, and how you're doing now.
Well, let me start by saying I'm doing fine now. It was quite a shock. To say it was unexpected is a wild understatement. It was the last thing in the world that I anticipated. Both my wife and I received positive tests, and she had a more difficult road than I did, but we got through it together. We immediately, as soon as we were tested positive, we went into quarantine for 14 days, did not go outside front door, stayed in the house, and we recovered together. I have to say my case was very mild, but the problem with this disease is that it's so variable. At the beginning, when you test positive, obviously you have no idea what your particular test is going to be like. As I say, she had a couple of very rough days. I had very, very mild symptoms, almost asymptomatic. So there's a lot of anxiety associated with it. It comes home to you that you don't know at the beginning whether you're going to have a mild case or a severe case, but got through it and certainly motivated me to be sure that the health and safety precautions at the Port Authority were ramped up quickly and to as high a degree of protection as we could make them. And
you have no lingering effects at all that you can tell?
Nope. I really feel and felt fully recovered, but certainly the memory of those days lives on vividly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you came through as well as you did, and because not just because I like you, but because you do have a very important job. And the Port Authority is, it's not actually the most well-known public agency, but it is one of the biggest. How many billions of dollars run in and out of your agency each year now and pre-COVID, if you will, because I know you've taken something of a financial hit like everyone has.
Well, I think there are two key figures here. One is we generate in normal times a little over $5 billion a year in terms of revenue, but at least as importantly, our capital plan has been the highest in our history. That is a $37 billion 10-year capital plan. Every dollar in which our revenues exceed our expenses goes into that capital plan. So, and frankly, the infrastructure of this region, the infrastructure of this country, certainly the infrastructure of the Port Authority simply has not been up to 21st century standards. Our airports, our legacy airports, they have historically been at the bottom of every single customer survey. We're in the midst of a commitment in terms of both public and private money. Of our ambition is to have a $20 billion rebuild of those airports. So the key here is that our revenues is what drives our capital plan, and our capital plan is what drives our ability to provide and upgrade what have been subpar, embarrassing airports and other facilities to 21st century standards.
So how much have your revenues gone down? What's your typical budget, and what's it going to be, with the COVID impact?
Well, sure. Let me just start with some volume statistics, because our revenue is highly correlated to the volume that we handle. The airports were down at their lowest point to 98% down, 2% of normal passengers. We're up, if you can call it that, to where it's 20% of normal maybe a shade over that, but around 20%, 80% down. Our commuter railroad path is similarly 80% down. The bridges and tunnels hit a low of being down about 60 to about 60%. They have recovered to where they're about 10% down in terms of the bridges and tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
And the seaport has probably been the most resilient. The supply lines have proved very resilient. And as of August, in fact, it was slightly above August of last year. It basically had recovered its volumes. But our big problem is that if you look at from the spring of this year, when COVID first hit, and project out 24 months from that, our estimate is that we will have $3 billion in total revenue loss. And that ties directly to our ability to continue with our capital projects. We've gone to DC. We've made the case, along with many others, but we've made the case in terms of our ability to contribute to a strong economic recovery and to build 21st century facilities that we need a $3 billion infusion from the federal government.
Right. And have you gotten any answer at all? Or are you just watching the news like the rest of us?
Well, we're doing a little more than that, but we're staying in touch with the situation. We are advocating extremely strongly for the need for us to, and the value of our receiving this financial aid. We would be able to contribute very, very strongly to the economic recovery the region and the country so desperately needs. But you can read it in the news, what we understand is that at this point, the deadlock in Washington simply means that there's not going to be a broad-based further stimulus bill, and that means that the money that certainly we hope for is still totally up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Well, you never know what could happen. You know, a couple tweets from now, we could be back to full funding. So, but let me ask you this: why do you think that the Port Authority could help really recover when you have these three airports which are operating at 20%? I don't care what kind of money you throw into them; people are not going to just start flying because of that. They're operating at 20%. Like, so how do you think you would really contribute to? And the ports are already doing well. So, what's the case for funding this extra $3 billion?
Well, the air travel is going to recover. Travel is going to recover. These are projects that look, just in terms of their construction their construction period, 4 to 5 years in the future. So this is about the future of the region. And we have to be in a position where our gateways in terms of our airports are part of a 21st century infrastructure where travelers are encouraged to come to the region. We have to work together to do that. And we want to do our part. So that's the building block. But in terms of the construction activity that we're talking about, because the Port Authority leverages private investment, for every dollar of either Port Authority capital or hopefully federal funds that go into these projects, we're going to attract anywhere from $5 to $10 of private investment. Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about is, it's not exaggeration, $15 billion or more of leveraged construction activity, which will generate jobs, which will attract other economic activity, and which will enable our airports to have not only in the future very solid and be an attraction, as opposed to something which the region frequently is embarrassed by in terms of attracting travelers and getting the travel and playing our part in getting the travel industry and the tourism business back on its feet.
Now, you're not used to being in this position because I don't think most people realize this, but Port Authority is a self-funded agency. You don't normally get streams of funding from Washington and Albany and New York City. You basically take the revenues from all of those bridges like the Bayonne, Goethals, Outer Bridge, George Washington, and then Holland and Lincoln Tunnel, and all the passenger facility fees that you get at the airports, and whatever port fees you get, and then you just sort of recirculate that money into your own operations. But this is new. Correct me if I'm saying anything wrong here. That said, you are pursuing some projects that, at least one that I can think of, the LaGuardia Airtrain, that's going to cost a couple of $1 billion. And there is not exactly a consensus in the transportation world that that project is even necessary. Now, you have been making this case for a while. I'm not going to ask for your whole spiel, but maybe give me the elevator speech here as to why, you know, you think, given these financial circumstances you're under, that you're still pursuing that project.
Well, I think it's irresponsible, seriously, irresponsible not to have a rail mass transit link to one of our 3 major airports. The airport is the only major airport on the east coast of the United States that doesn't have a rail mass transit link. We are in the midst of a complete rebuild of LaGuardia Airport. It is itself an $8 billion construction project, 3/4 of it provided by private investment. It is going to be a 21st century global standard, best in class airport. But what passengers tell us, and again, in customer surveys and directly, that access to an airport is one of their key measuring sticks of whether an airport is truly best in class. And it is one of the key gateways to the region. So we are 100% committed, not only to provide a reliable and predictable rail mass transit link to the airport, but look beyond the airport itself. What we do right now is we force virtually every single passenger to go get to LaGuardia by either car or other ground transportation on highly congested roadways. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is get passengers coming to the airport out of their cars and onto mass transit. What we know from experience, decades, is that without a rail mass transit link, the people who use public transportation are going to be a single-digit percentage of passengers. So we congest our roadways. We give people an unreliable and unpredictable time to get to the airport. Mm-hmm. The congested roadways generate increased greenhouse gases. They generate increased air pollution in the neighborhood of the airport. So that getting a rail mass transit link, which will get people out of their cars, it clearly benefits air passengers in terms of, if you're coming from Manhattan, having a less than 30-minute and reliable and predictable ride. But it also benefits motorists who don't care about the airport, gets other cars off of it, reduces congestion, reduces greenhouse gases, reduces air pollution. Now, the other thing that I would just say, Erik, is that the vast majority of transportation experts, the vast majority of people who care about economic activity in the region, the vast majority of people who actually do care about New York airports being world-class, which everyone should in terms of the future of the region, support the Airtrain. And what has just happened in the last 2 weeks is that the Federal Aviation Administration, which is running an environmental impact statement process, an environmental review, has held public hearings. They were done virtually. Mm-hmm. But still, in terms of speakers at those hearings, those who took a position on the Airtrain outnumbered 4-to-1. Supporters outnumbered critics 4-to-1. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, we had an extraordinary group of 12 former very high-ranking transportation experts who were either commissioners of traffic, heads of departments of transportation, write and endorse the Airtrain project. So if you look across labor, if you look across business, if you look across civic organizations, if you look up across well-respected transportation experts, the vast majority are in favor of the Airtrain.
You know, there are so many ways to look at this project. One of the things that struck me was that it seemed to me like Governor Cuomo came up with it. It wasn't in any of the strategic plans or, you know, any of those, you know, wonky transportation groups. None of them proposed it. It sort of was hatched out of, you know, the second floor. And when Cuomo announced it, and I was there, you know, his first price tag was, you know, maybe it'll cost $450 million. Like within a week, Pat Foy, your predecessor, said, well, maybe it'll be $1 billion. And now it's $2 billion. How much do you think it will cost by the time it's said and done? I think we have 2 Airtrains, 2 brand new Airtrains on the drawing boards and in the process of moving toward construction. The LaGuardia Airtrain, and we're completely replacing the Newark Airtrain.
I might just say parenthetically, we are 100% committed across all 3 airports to have rail mass transit links, because I think the agency believes that it is irresponsible not to do it. But what Governor Cuomo did 5 years ago was to name a blue ribbon, and it was an extraordinary set of individuals, panel, to come up with a master plan vision, both for LaGuardia and for JFK. They did that. One of the key elements of their recommendations, which which was unfettered, was not only to construct a first-class airport, but that it had to have a rail mass transit link. I don't think you can find, in fact, I defy you to find an airport expert who does not believe that access to the airport is one of the top 3 or 4 criteria by which airports are judged by passengers.
Oh yeah, there's no question about that. And no one likes going to and from LaGuardia Airport. Although I have to say, the Q70 bus, I have tried it before. It wasn't actually that bad. Now, was I loaded down with luggage? No. Was I a foreigner who didn't understand where I was going? No. So, that was probably easier for me than it was for most people. And I could understand, the desire to just get on a train, which is what most people, certainly most Europeans, are used to doing when they land at an airport. I did get over the fact that the train actually takes you the wrong direction. If you're going to Manhattan, it takes you back to Willets Point, and then you have to get on another train. But I do want to ask you about that connection. How would you get from Willets Point to Manhattan? The Long Island Railroad doesn't run that often, and the 7 train is not that fast. So, what's your expectation? What's going to happen with that connection?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a bad connection. I think you have to start with the notion, I suspect there's no one listening in here who, in looking at their GPS, hasn't chosen one route versus another, not by looking at the tenths of a mile, but by which is fastest. And what, in this built environment, what is the fastest route to the airport is in the connection that we have developed in terms of the Long Island Railroad to Willets Point to the airport. So the notion of looking at the tenths of a mile, that's not what you should judge a rail mass transit link by. You should judge by whether it gets you there quickly, fast, reliable, and predictable.
So you think the MTA is going to add enough Long Island Railroad trains that you won't have to wait more than 5 or 8 minutes for a train once you get to Willets Point?
Well, obviously, we're working with the MTA, and our goal is to have 15-minute service to Willets Point. And you have to remember that in the time frame that we're talking about, the Long Island Railroad will connect both to Penn Station, where it currently connects, but also to Grand Central. And in addition, in terms of passengers, it connects obviously to the entire Long Island Railroad network, and it connects to the subway. So passengers will have their choice.
I actually, just to switch to another airport very briefly, JFK, my favorite new route from JFK to get to the part of Brooklyn where I live is to take the B-15 bus, which is very hard to find, actually, unless you know exactly where it is. But if you can find it at Terminal 5 and get on that bus, it connects you to the 3 train, and then you're on the subway system. And your whole, commute is from the airport is an hour, and it costs you $2.75. So I think that's an underdeveloped, sort of undersold, avenue that the Port Authority could look to improve a little bit. Right now the bus is, I think, 21 stops to get you to the train. Maybe you could add a faster bus. But that's just a suggestion. I want to move on to a couple of other things. We have a real estate audience here, so you have some real estate interests. Actually, you have a Red Hook terminal, a shipping container port. It's a very small operation, but it's 80 acres of waterfront land right across from Manhattan, right on the New York Harbor. I think a lot of developers would kill to build housing there or something, and the Port Authority needs money. Why not sell that for a huge amount of money? Just move that shipping operation to Sunset Park or to New Jersey, and then reap the benefits. So you could buy a bunch of Airtrains probably for that.
Well, So let's talk about Red Hook for a second. So right now, what the Port Authority has is a container operation and other marine cargo operations there. We understand that in terms of the land, it is not its highest and best use. So we have looked at the alternative in terms of whether we could move the marine operations. We are committed to having a working Brooklyn waterfront. And the question there is where it's located. So we've had discussions in terms of moving it to the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. That is operated by the city, by their economic development agency, EDC.
Mhm.
So our role in terms of the potential development of that underutilized piece of land is really to get out of the way. We're not an economic development organization, so that the development plans would be a question of the state, the city, and the community developing plans that would put that piece of land to its highest and best use, find a consensus for that, and we're prepared to support that.
Mhm.
So we have looked at what that alternative would look like in terms of maintaining a working waterfront, shifting those operations to the south, and we would absolutely be prepared to work with the state, the city, and the community in terms of enabling development on that site.
Another big project is the Port Authority bus terminal. I feel like I've been covering that for years and years, and it's still there. Nothing seems to have happened. What's the latest in terms of the plan? You had a pretty good plan, I thought, at one point, and then the politicians came in and killed it because it involved some eminent domain condemnations, and the locals went nuts, and you guys backed off. What's the status of the Port Authority bus terminal replacement project?
Well, let me first say the two pillars of that. The pillar number one is that we are committed to building a new bus terminal, replacing the existing one, which obviously way out of date, and this is way overdue. Second pillar is that we're going to do it with full community involvement in terms of the west side of Manhattan, where the facility is located. So we're in the process of honoring both of those key pillars. Where we are is where the environmental review process for a replacement bus terminal is underway. We are developing what in the jargon of environmental review is called a scoping document, which describes exactly what the scope of the project is. We published it as a draft. We received a lot of comment from both sides of the river.
Mm-hmm.
And we are moving certainly well before the end of the year to publishing the scoping document in final form. And it will reflect changes, significant changes in terms of our original proposal, which reflects the comments that we've received. So this is a major project. The COVID-19 crisis has slowed the preparation of that document down a bit, but we're committed to getting it in final form, and that will move along the environmental review process which will then move to the federal government to oversee the conclusion of that. And then we're committed to a construction process that starts right after the review process concludes.
But have you narrowed it down to whether or not you're going to rebuild the terminal as it exists or build something somewhere else, bearing in mind the fact that you intend to keep the buses operating during the project?
Well, let me begin by saying that our proposal is not going to involve any takings of private property. But it is an expanded notion in terms of trying to rebuild a facility and take account of community concerns. And as I say, I think I need to let the process conclude, and we will publish our new proposal, as I say, well before the end of the year. But I think it's a very responsive, creative proposal. It's going to take a lot to implement it. It's going to take support from many different sources, but we think we have a proposal that deserves support.
And are we going to fall over backwards when we see the number associated with that? Because I do remember when 10 billion came out, I was like, what? $10 billion to build a bus terminal. But that was years ago, so I would imagine it's going to be at least that much. But am I in the ballpark?
Well, I'm not going to get into trying to cost it out right now. That'll be part of the further development. But you have to remember that that's one of the challenges of building major new infrastructure in areas which are already built up. And this is a major facility. Mm-hmm. So it is going to have a significant footprint like the existing facility. Where one of the elements of the discussion is going to have to be the financing of it. But we recognize that. We're prepared to embrace it. That's what the Port Authority does. If you look at, the fact is, if you look at infrastructure, mm-hmm. the LaGuardia complete rebuild is an $8 billion construction.
Now, you got a lot of help from the private sector on airports, because there's money to be made at airports. Is there money to be made at a bus terminal? And can you get any help in terms of PPPs or?
Well, we are looking at that, and part of the proposal is, in fact, to leverage private investment. But as I say, I think that should be a subject once we get the final scoping document released. But I think the important thing in terms of people who are listening to this is we need 21st century infrastructure. We have to recognize it's going to be expensive. We have to recognize that it is challenging to do, but we need to get on with it. Mm-hmm. And that
I think everyone agrees with that. There are some times when we say, well, why does it have to be as expensive as it is? You look at, say, the Gateway Tunnel. Now, I know that's an Amtrak project, but you guys are involved with that. And then you see this number's like $30 billion to do a few miles of rail and a new bridge. Why does it cost so much per mile, even compared to other local projects, which we also think are too expensive? Like, why is Gateway costing what it's costing?
Well, I think what I'd say to you is that there's a lot of effort and a lot of energy going into the Gateway project. That is, in terms of the policies and the development process, that is in the purview of the Gateway Development Corporation, soon to be the Gateway Development Commission, Amtrak. So it's both states and Amtrak. And a lot of effort is going into whether there are construction approaches which would reduce costs. But again, it's the $30 billion figure is associated literally with a 9-phase redevelopment of a major portion of the Amtrak right-of-way coming into and leaving Penn Station. Mm-hmm. So the tunnels themselves are a much smaller part of that. But your basic point of, yes, infrastructure is expensive. We need to take it on. Other countries have taken it on. The United States should be able to take it on. And we have to come up with financing. And the federal government has a large role to play. And what I'd say about Gateway is the states have been prepared and are prepared and have made the financial commitment to pay for 50% of it. And the reason it hasn't moved forward is the feds have not come to the table, which is irresponsible.
I know that has been a big problem, not just for the real estate community, but for the business community as a whole. And just for those viewers who are not aware, we're talking about the passenger rail tunnel under the Hudson River, from New Jersey into Penn Station. There's one tunnel in each direction. They're both 100 years old. They're falling apart, they're deteriorating, in part because of Sandy, in part because of they're old. And the Gateway plan would build a new tunnel, which would then take that train traffic and allow you to repair the existing tunnel. So we'd end up with twice as much tunnel capacity as we had, and some redundancy, which we need, because if these tunnels go out, obviously it completely cuts off, that Amtrak Northeast Passage, which is the only profitable sector of the whole Amtrak system, and carries a heck of a lot of New Jersey transit trains and other folks back and forth, from up the eastern seaboard and across from New Jersey. So obviously crucial to the economy, all on hold because the Trump administration did not live up to the 50% promise that Obama had made. And so we basically been stuck since then. I assume you have no news at all to report on the funding progress for Gateway.
No, I think we're stuck in exactly the same place. Both states, Port Authority, but more importantly, the Gateway Development Corporation has been an ardent advocate, has talked endlessly to the federal government, and we are still stuck with their being unwilling to come to the table.
So what about the World Trade Center? The Port Authority has been involved for decades with the World Trade Center, and I know that you have now sort of outsourced the leasing, if you will, of one World Trade Center to the Durst organization, which I think the real estate community sort of was very happy about, not just because Durst is part of the real estate community, but because the Port Authority is really not a real estate agency. But how has that worked out? I mean, obviously office leasing is taking a hit right now, and the future of it is in some amount of question. So how is it going at One World Trade Center, and for that matter, the other buildings that Silverstein is operating?
Look, the big picture here is that it's going extraordinarily well. And I think if you look at what has the World Trade Center campus, those office buildings, they have leased up extraordinarily well. The One World Trade Center, just before the COVID-19, had hit its stabilization level. And the campus has come an extraordinary way. And I think you have to step back and look at the big picture here. The campus is in extraordinarily good shape. Between 35 and 40,000 employees pre-COVID came to the campus in terms of the office buildings. That's, as you said, it's One World Trade Center, it's four World Trade Center, it's 7 World Trade Center, came there every day. The campus itself, I've been at the Port Authority for 3 years. That campus has gone from looking as if it was a construction site, where now the Silverstein organization completed 3 World Trade Center a little over a year ago, with all 4 of those office buildings open, with the memorial and museum open, with activities now taking place, again, pre-COVID, on the entire campus in terms of activation. The campus had become a major contributor to Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan is one of the most attractive real estate sectors in terms of strength. Again, it's pre-COVID. So now talk about going forward. People are going to travel again at the airports. They're going to return to work. The leasing has remained strong. There's a tiny percentage of any of the lessees who have either said they intend to depart or anything else. So the campus and the office leasing remains extremely strong. And the question becomes, how are we going to get out of this pre-COVID crisis that we're in? It may depend on a vaccine. It may depend on people's confidence in treatments. But I have no doubt that the region will come back strong. It always has. And we will see that again. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
What's the Port Authority's policy as far as your own employees? Are you asking them to go back to work? Are you offering them the chance? Are you telling them not to come back to work? And what about you personally?
Well, you have to remember, 2/3 of our employees have not missed a day in terms of coming back to work. They're essential workers. We have kept every single facility operating on an operating basis. I don't think we've missed a beat. We've had to operate the facility somewhat differently in terms of trying to economize in view of the declines in volumes. But I am extraordinarily admiring and grateful to the commitment of, as I say, 2/3 of our workforce who have been at the facilities, who have come into work wherever that was, that are necessary in terms of operating the facilities. We have had about 1/3 of our employees working remotely. That's consistent with the directives that have come from both governors in terms of controlling the spread of the virus. And we are looking at, as the governors have opened up each of their states, but obviously the New York City and Northern New Jersey region have been the focus of most control. And so we're looking to be consistent with that, but we are in the process of developing gradual return to work guidelines, even in terms of the 1/3 that have been working remotely.
Mm-hmm. So I very briefly, you mentioned you're replacing the Newark Airtrain. I guess it's just old, it's just falling apart, or it's just outdated. Are you doing anything new there, or you're just replacing the train exactly as it is?
Well, I mean, I think your words are precisely perfect. It is out of date. It is working poorly. It is subject to multiple outages, and it should have been replaced years ago. And so we are stepping up to make it a 21st century rail mass transit link that ties to the Northeast Corridor. And the other project that we have on the table is what gets called Path to Newark, but it is our commuter railroad train runs to Newark Penn Station, and we have as a key part of our capital plan extending that so that it will connect directly to the Airtrain. So ultimately, the vision is to have a commuter railroad, a path rail mass transit link that gets you right to the Airtrain station, and have that connect seamlessly to a new Airtrain that is not subject to constant outages.
So I don't know how do you get to Manhattan or wherever you're going when you fly into Newark? I mean, I've done it once where I've taken mass transportation from Newark. I think it took me, maybe close to 2 hours to get to Brooklyn from there, or maybe an hour and a half. It wasn't that terrible, but it was a little bit daunting. I don't know how many people, think of mass transit when they fly in and out of Newark, but how do you do it? And do you think that you can get to the point where people are really shifting their modes of transit from the automobile?
Well, so let me begin by saying our ambition is not to have access characterized as not that terrible. That's not the goal to which we aspire. We want to provide 21st century global standard, not only airport facilities, which we're in the process of building at both LaGuardia and Newark right now. We have an ambition to get to JFK, but we're paying a lot of attention to access. And so right now, I don't think it's acceptable to have facilities that are described exactly the way you described them, which is out of date, unreliable. Have it be that the basic experience, at best, what you can hope for is an hour to an hour and a half, multiple inconveniences on the way. I mean, that's simply one of the top of our agendas, which is we're building the new LaGuardia Airtrain. We're building a replacement 21st century Airtrain at Newark. We are going to improve both the experience and the capacity of the JFK Airtrain.
So basically what I do, if I flew into Newark, then I would get on an Airtrain, take that to New Jersey Transit, and take New Jersey Transit into Penn Station, and then take the subway from there. Is that basically what you're asking me to do as a traveler?
Well, you have that you can connect to New Jersey Transit right now. We're trying to provide not only a reliable air train. I mean, right now, as I say, the outages make it unreliable. That's not acceptable. Right now, you can't connect to New Jersey Transit. You can connect to Amtrak. What we want to provide is another alternative, which would take you right into the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, which is the path to Newark. But our
one seat ride, you're saying?
Well,
there are 2 seats.
Well, there's going to be connections, right? I mean, but that's the consequence of a built environment. You can't. I would cite you the extraordinary fast trains in France and Germany. Those trains run on dedicated rights of way, and their major stations it's not true every place, but their major stations are frequently outside of the cities that they're serving. And the reason they're outside is because you can't bring a brand new train right away into the middle of a city as a brand new operation. Now, London is doing something where it's underground, and there, we could ultimately in the long term think about it, but in terms of something that's within your and my time horizon,
Right.
we are going to improve the rail mass transit links to the maximum extent we can.
And we have just time for, I think, one more question. And this is not an infrastructure question, it's a politics question. But Port Authority has had some issues with politics over the years. I haven't heard much about that recently. But for a while there were basically two agencies. I mean, it was a bi-state agency, but in more ways than one. There was this New Jersey agenda and there was this New York agenda, and they always seemed to be at odds, fighting with each other for dollars. One governor had one agenda, one had another, and there was just this constant push and pull. And in fact, the director of the Port Authority, which is now you, didn't really have control over the whole agency. There was like a New Jersey director who ran the New Jersey side, and the New York person ran the New York side. Is that all gone now? Is it everyone just getting along, or what's the story in terms of the political divide?
Well, what I would say, I can only describe my own experience. I came in on the same day as a new chair of the board from New Jersey, Kevin O'Toole. And from day one, we made the commitment to each other that we were going to do what was best for the region, and we were going to work together. We were going to oversee an agency that functioned, that wasn't driven by rivalries that were counterproductive. And he has been a great partner. We have worked extraordinarily well together. We have tried to have a regional agenda, not a one state or other state agenda. Both governors, Governor Cuomo and Governor Murphy, have been enormously supportive of that approach. And I would say the reason you haven't heard about it for the last 3 years is that the chairman and I have worked extremely closely together. We've become friends. We are certainly business and public servant partners. And I think both of us are extremely proud of what the agency has been able to accomplish by the hard work of the employees, but with a senior leadership that is really completely united in terms of promoting the infrastructure agenda the region needs.
How does that work in the level that, I mean, the Airtrain, just to take one example, that's nowhere near New Jersey. It's going to cost at least $2 billion. That's money that theoretically could be spent on something that would help New Jersey. So doesn't New Jersey come in and say, okay, that's $2 billion for you. Now I get $2 billion to do something else. I mean, does it still work that way?
Well, it requires a balanced agenda. We're rebuilding LaGuardia. At the same time, we're building a brand new Terminal 1 and a new centralized parking lot and rental car facility at Newark. Where for each of the Airtrains, each of the airports, we have Airtrain agendas. By the way, the LaGuardia Airtrain cost is $2 billion. The Newark Airtrain cost is $2 billion. Apparently, that's what Airtrains go for these days.
That's a nice coincidence there.
But the point is, yes, it's a joint agenda, but that's why it's called the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which is we're pursuing a bi-state agenda, and we're not quibbling over details. We're working together where we are pursuing the priorities that each state, that each governor has set. And what I would say is we're making progress on it. Each state is satisfied with the progress that we're making, and Chairman O'Toole and I are doing it together.
Does the whole staff answer to you, or are there still divisions or people who came from the New Jersey side and while technically you're their boss, this is the way it used to be, the executive director was technically the boss of those folks, but really they answer to a New Jersey person. Do you still have that, or does everyone answer to you?
Well, everyone answers to me. They report to me. They're people aren't, from my point of view, New York or New Jersey people. There aren't people who are hired on that basis. They're hired on the basis of merit, and we work together on a joint agenda. And from my point of view, the point is there are no secrets. There's no hidden agendas. The point is it's a joint agenda, and it's one that's talked over. And the board obviously has 6 members from New Jersey, 6 members from New York. The major projects are funded and approved by a board vote. So the chair of the board needs to be on board, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And my experience is, particularly in terms of the public service orientation of really all the New Jersey commissioners and the New York commissioners and the chairman and vice chairman of the board, is that an agenda that pursues even-handedly and fairly the priorities of the Port Authority, which is a bi-state organization, and therefore some of them are New York-based, some of them are New Jersey-based, some of them are joint.
Mm-hmm.
We found a way to work together, but as a matter of executive reporting and operation of the organization, that's my responsibility. The board sets policy. So major policy decisions, the capital allocations, all those are board decisions. And by definition, therefore, they become joint bi-state decisions.
Well, we are out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. I would like to thank Port Authority Executive Director Rick Cotton. Thank you for joining us. To our viewers, this is the final TRD Talks of our season. Stay tuned for details on when our next season will begin. But in the meantime, please go to therealdeal.com to subscribe so we can continue to bring you these free webinars and all of the coverage that we do. Thank you again to Rick Cotton, and good afternoon, everyone.